You are listening to Terra Signals, presented by Normal Paranormal. I am your host, Justin Bamforth. My guest tonight is a very interesting woman who has had some interesting experiences. Her name is Michaela, and she's originally from the Baltimore, Maryland area, where she had a brief but equally interesting career in forensics with law enforcement. Michaela was involved with several criminal investigations and collected forensic evidence from crime scenes. But following that, she traveled extensively around the US, including Alaska and Hawaii, where she was employed aboard a cruise ship. And this is where I first learned about one of her rather strange encounters, which, of course, we will get into. Now, in recent years, Michaela has put more of an emphasis on travel, specifically train travel, and has completed 2 coast-to-coast journeys by train so far. Her experiences have taught her how to have a life is short mindset, which she documents under her Instagram. Michaela, my friend, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Now, you had posted something over on Reddit, which is what initially got my attention, which is where we should start a conversation. You had this experience in Maui at the start of 2023 while you were still employed with the cruise line, correct?
Yeah, it was in when was it? Late July to early August is when I was in Maui staying the week that I did and experienced everything.
How long were you with this cruise line at that time?
So funny enough, I was looking on my memories today and I actually started training for it a year ago today. So from the end of February, um, the contract started once the training began. So it was a 6 month contract, which would end in August. So I ended up ending my contract a week early. So I was there for 5 months and 3 weeks.
And what prompted you to end the contract early?
See, that's the thing. I can't really explain what it was besides just a gut feeling and a voice in my head telling me for some reason it's time to disembark.
Let me ask you, when you were working on the cruise ship, was it a positive experience prior to this? Were you enjoying it or was it negative?
Oh yeah, it was definitely mostly positive. I mean, you got to see Hawaii for free, meet amazing people. I mean, people from all over the world worked on this ship, so you make a lot of connections. I will say it got pretty stressful toward the end just because you don't get days off. So you're working, 10 to 12-hour shifts 7 days a week for that entire yeah, that entire time. So, um, aside from not having days off and having a very small room to share with roommates, it was a really positive experience.
If I understand correctly, you were docked in Maui at this time
Mhm.
and you were scheduled to set sail around 5:30, right?
Yes.
And you had mentioned at that time you were working at the bar on the pool deck, and you had a break at 11 a.m.
Yes.
You woke up that day and you had a strange feeling.
Yeah, I always told myself I would finish my contract. For the day I started, I said, I'm going to finish this because, they kind of introduce the job as a lot of people will either get fired or quit before their contract is up. So I was determined to not be one of those people. Um, but for some reason that day, I woke up and just had this feeling that I should leave and I should get off the ship in Maui that day. And I couldn't really explain it. Um, it started off in the morning, and then by the time I took my break, I went back to my cabin to try to get a nap in. And right before I laid down, a I can only explain it as a voice in my head saying, "Pack up, leave now, get off the ship."
Do you still remember what that voice sounded like?
Ah, vaguely. It it didn't really sound, either male or female. It was deeper than my voice, but, I couldn't, associate male or female to it, and it was just clear as day, and it was almost like if someone whispered in your ear, but in the back of your head instead.
But was it audible to you? Was it audibly a whisper, or was it a loud, very audible voice?
It was it was okay, it was probably halfway between, like, a whisper and just someone, stating something as if you were right in front of them.
And the reason I'm asking this is, just to put it out there in case anyone else can relate to it, right? Because I think the hardest part about these strange experiences, or what we would deem as strange experiences, maybe they're normal experiences that we just, tune our minds out to them. But the hardest part about this is articulating the experience itself, right?
Yeah, and, it took me a while to kind of reflect and, I guess, kind of gather the words to describe it in an accurate way, and another thing, that was kind of strange about it was, in my head at any point in time, there's 1,000 thoughts running through it. I have, lovely ADHD brain, and, when I heard that voice, it's like my everything else in my brain just shut off. Everything I was thinking just took a pause while that voice was talking.
Oh no, that is interesting.
Yeah, it's like it almost kind of like, wanted to completely redirect my attention to what it was saying.
Had you ever heard anything like this before? Had you ever received any sorts of voices that pop in your head like this?
No, I'm not as just audible and straightforward as that was. I think everyone's kind of had like a gut feeling experience where, you just have a feeling, but that was the first time I've ever heard anything.
What happened after that? Because that's a pretty stern warning. Pack up, leave, get off the ship. Did it say it? Did it repeat itself, or did it just say it once?
So it said it twice.
Oh,
Yeah, so it said it twice for whatever reason. Um, and it was stern, but it wasn't like threatening. But I just after that I felt just compelled to listen to it. I mean, even logically in my head, it just made no sense to end my contract early. I had a week left. What's one more week? So it was kind of strange to ignore logic in my head and just go with this feeling.
well, what do you think prompted you to go with this feeling? Because you've never had any experiences like this before. All of a sudden, some random voice pops in your head telling you to get off the ship to pack up all your things. Doesn't the logical side of you come into play and say, "No, this is ridiculous. There's no reason for this."
Oh yeah, 100%. And I afterwards, I kind of just like sat down on my bed a minute and kind of thought about it. I'm like, am I really gonna do this right now? Again, like it doesn't make any sense to me, but it's it's like in that moment, it's like it also reassured me that like logic didn't matter in this situation, which was weird to wrap my head around.
So you pack up your things, I guess.
Yeah, I just start packing and just grabbing, all my important stuff. I definitely left a lot of random stuff behind. Um, but just took all my clothes, all the important things, all of my little trinkets that I bought for friends and family and just didn't tell anyone and just walked right off the ship.
No kidding. So you didn't like tell your employer. You didn't say, "Hey, I'm out of here."
No.
You just
No, I didn't because and I again, I always thought to myself, like, I would never jump ship, which is what we call it when you just up and leave. I always thought, like, I'll give a 48-hour notice, I'll sign the resignation form, I'll be smart about it. But I just like I said, I just felt compelled. It was like I was almost running out of time, it felt like, and I felt like maybe if I did do it the proper way, that someone would try to talk me out of it. So I just kind of feel like I just wanted to avoid all of that.
Did any of your other colleagues, while you were still on the ship before this encounter happened, did they ever talk about strange things happening on this particular ship?
Not that I can recall. Um, it was an older ship. It was about 20 years old. Um, and I guess it's hard to say what's paranormal on a large moving ship, too, because things can move around when there's rough seas. The bulkheads, the walls of the ship always make creaking noises. So, um, I I think if anyone did experience anything paranormal, that it may have just been brushed off as, an old creaking ship.
Okay. What about any unusual events that maybe don't fit the typical paranormal categorical box, but anything else unusual?
Um, no, not that I can think of, honestly.
So you get off the ship, you're on land, and now what? What's your next move here?
That's a thing. I didn't know. I always knew that after my contract, I wanted to stay a week in Maui because we the ship sailed to a different island every day, but on Sundays we overnighted in Maui, and on Thursdays we stayed overnight in Kauai. So those became my two favorite islands because I actually got to spend time on them. Kauai was way too expensive to stay in for a week, so I decided I'm just gonna soak up the sun in Maui with the money I saved up from working. And so after I got off the ship, I just got a hotel at the beach. The next day, went to the other side of the island to stay in Lahaina for the rest of my time.
Did you feel like there was a force guiding you and directing you as to where to go next? Or were you really putting some time and effort into deciding what to do next?
No, that's it. It all did kind of just come all of a sudden. I didn't even really know a lot about Lahaina until probably my last 2 weeks on the ship. Um, for whatever reason, that 2 weeks, so many people just started talking to me about Lahaina and how beautiful it was and how historic it was. So, it kind of popped in my head like, oh, I'll visit Lahaina. And once I got off the ship, it changed. I was like, I'm just gonna stay in Lahaina the whole time and really, take time to explore that.
What did you see in Lahaina when you were there?
It's a very old historic part of Maui. Um, a lot of the buildings are, really old, built in late 1800s, early 1900s. Um, the old Lahaina courthouse was just absolutely beautiful, and of course the old banyan tree was right behind the courthouse, which was just spectacular and beautiful. Like there are banyan trees all over the Hawaiian Islands, but there's something special about that one in Lahaina. I can't really describe it, but it has an energy to it. So, I had spent a lot of time at the courthouse, the banyan tree, just explored a lot of cool local bars, old like fisheries and seafood restaurants where they catch everything fresh. Did a few tours of historic places and just kind of got a nice little piece of history of Lahaina.
But you had mentioned that you had placed your hands on the banyan tree because one of your Uber drivers told you to do that or something?
Yeah, so but I was coming back from visiting one of my friends that actually she ended up quitting and staying in Maui and living there full time. So I was visiting her, and on my way back, I asked my Uber driver, I was like, "Hey, it's going to be my last day here. What do you recommend that I do while I'm still here in Lahaina? And he said, go to the banyan tree and place your hand on it, place your head on it, and just thank it for everything. And just thank Maui for having you and welcoming you. And so that's exactly what I did. And he explained that, the banyan tree had a very kind of spiritual presence to it. And I didn't really do any research on banyan trees up until recently when I started sharing this experience and found that in a lot of cultures, they're very spiritually regarded. And, a lot of times it's believed that, spirits kind of hang out in all the branches. Because if you've ever seen a banyan tree, they have a lot of branches and, just kind of things that hang down, a lot of leaves. It's a very intricate looking tree. So a lot of cultures believe that, like, the spirits kind of hang out in those branches and leaves. And I've got to tell you, it really did have a very powerful energy to it.
How so?
So the area around the banyan tree is very, very crowded with tourists. That most of Lahaina is. Um, and so it's very loud. People talking, kids running around. But when I just focused on the tree and put my hand and head on it, it's like for a few seconds, everything was just silent, and like you couldn't hear the tourists. You could only just focus on like this lightning bolt kind of coursing through your body. And I remember when I did touch it, and I thanked Maui for having me and showing me such a beautiful experience. Um, it it kind of reassured me because up until this point, I was still overthinking, "Oh my god, what did I do? I just quit a week early. That was such a dumb decision." And while I was, thanking this tree, I it wasn't a voice like the one I felt in the on the ship, but it was just kind of like an unspoken communication where it just kind of said, you know, "You made the right decision." And then it kind of just said, "Now it's time to leave." Which I was already leaving, the day after, 2 days from that point. So I was already leaving, but it was just kind of interesting that you know, oh, a few days earlier, it wanted me to stay here, and now it's telling me, "Thanks for staying, but time to go."
So you had been to the tree prior.
So I've been to yeah, I was at the tree prior, but I didn't think to touch it, or I didn't know about the energy of it. I just kind of, walked past it and thought, "Oh, what a cool tree."
So you had this really interesting experience with the tree. And I know to those who may be listening right now, who may be in touch with nature and with our planet, they can relate. But then other people, they're probably hearing this and they're thinking, "Oh, yeah, okay, whatever," right?
Right.
you know,
Crazy tree hugger.
yeah, exactly. But that's not where it gets weird because you then left. You went back to the East Coast, right?
Yes. Went back to the East Coast 2 days later.
And what happens next?
So 2 days after I have arrived on the East Coast, I'm sitting on my friend's couch and I get a news alert that Maui is on fire, and specifically Lahaina was on fire. And it just, oh man, it hit me hard.
Breaking news in Hawaii right now, at least 1,000 people are still missing as the deadly wildfires burn. Breaking news anchor Megan Mitchell joins us from the newsroom with the latest from overnight. Okay, Megan, officials say they do expect that death toll to rise.
Yeah, Kara, and this morning we know that 55 people have died in this fire. Officials even saying they've barely began the process for looking for survivors here. The devastation is overwhelming. The governor there even saying that it looked like a bomb went off. Images of an island paradise, palm trees, sailboats, buildings, all up in flames. At least 1,000 structures burned down. Block after block, houses are burnt to a crisp, almost looking like ruins of what was just a few days ago a colorful vacation and residential community.
I mean, at first it was just shock because, I wasn't even thinking, oh my gosh, I was just there. I was thinking, oh my gosh, the people of Maui, all these kind, welcoming people, they don't deserve this. And then I just kind of started thinking, like, all the bars I went to are destroyed, the restaurants, the hotel I stayed at. Um, I even got a tattoo my last day there to kind of, remember the experience, and that tattoo shop isn't even there anymore. Um, so that yeah, that was like a kind of like a punch in the gut.
What about your friend who lived there?
Luckily, she was on the completely other side of Maui. She lived on one of the tops of the mountain, so luckily she was fine.
But you were supposed to be there.
Yeah, if I was supposed to end my contract a week later, and I would have been in Lahaina at that point if everything worked out the same way that it did the previous week, then I would have been right there at the time of the fires.
What do you think the voice was?
I don't I don't know. Um, I've kind of been reflecting on it a lot recently. I think, you know, s- at first when it happened, I kind of didn't think about it. I don't know if I subconsciously didn't want to process it or just couldn't at the time, but I didn't really think about it. I didn't put thought into it. It wasn't until, I started sharing my story on Reddit and, really talking to people about it that I started thinking, okay, what was that? And I was doing just some more reading on, the Hawaiian Islands and kind of the spiritual aspect of the islands, because no matter where you are on the islands, it does have a, a very, I guess, just spiritual feeling to it. Um, and I kind of read that, if you look out for the islands will look out for you. And, I know I was still a tourist there, I'm not perfect. I'm still kind of entering this land that in a way wasn't meant for me, but I always tried to show it as much respect as possible. Like, I would always remind passengers and even some crew members, not to take any shells or rocks or sand from anywhere they visit because, what belongs to the island stays on the island. And, it can really invite some bad energy if you take anything, you know, that the island doesn't want you to take. So, I really did try to show that area as much respect as possible, and a part of me thinks that maybe it was just saying thank you for, protecting us, so now we're gonna protect you.
Yeah, that's really profound. I'd never heard of that before. That you should not take something from the island because it belongs to the island.
Yeah, so when I originally planned on, leaving for the ship, I wanted to take some sand from each beach that I went to and bring it back, and I Googled, I'm like, "Okay, is that okay? Is that gonna, like, is that against their culture?" And it turns out, yeah, you shouldn't do that. So that's when I was like, "Okay, I'm not gonna touch anything on the island that I'm not supposed to." And yeah, just kind of wanted to just just respect the place where I was living at the time as much as possible.
Did you ever get the feeling that you had been at that particular place before?
Oh, now that you mention it, yeah. Um, uh, not the entire time, but, the banyan tree. When I touched the banyan tree, it was like I had been there before.
Did it feel like a deja vu experience?
Yes, 100%, and I kinda maybe it's just because I've been to other banyan trees before and, it's like, "Oh, it's a banyan tree, of course I've been here," but it was just a very unique feeling, like, the whole environment, the whole atmosphere felt like I had visited that before, even though I know I hadn't.
When you were touring some of the buildings there, did anything stand out as instantly recognizable to you? Like,
Um, no, other than that one deja vu moment, no, it was all very new to me. I felt like I was, like, exploring a whole new world 'cause, on the ship, I got to mostly see the islands from afar or, have a limited amount of time and had to stay close to the ship, so now I was just taking in as much as I could that I'd never had the time to do.
do you consider yourself a spiritual person?
Yes, 100%. Um, I grew up in a very religious Catholic family, and, uh, I don't identify with Catholicism anymore after years and years of Catholic school, but I have always felt, that there's something else out there and that we're connected to it, and, I don't really like to label whatever that is, so I just kind of refer to it as the universe.
When you grew up Catholic, did that kind of like influence your interest in the paranormal, or did it deter you?
No, it definitely interested me more, especially 'cause, I started once you see, like, ghost hunters and, like, the movie The Exorcist, it's kinda like, "Okay, is that real? Is that really a thing?" So I would kind of, like, kinda ask my teachers and even, like, the priests about it, and they were very like, they didn't wanna talk about it, and in my head, I'm like, "Okay, if it's not a thing, why wouldn't you wanna just, dismiss it as not being real? Why would you just not talk about it at all?" So it kind of just made me wonder, like, okay, even if this strict religion kind of believes in something like this, then there has to be some sort of substance to it. So I feel like from there, I kind of just wanted to explore that a little more.
Explore it in what way?
Um, I guess just learn about it and uh, kind of just get in touch with whatever other entities were out there, not necessarily straight
Oh
up
boy.
communicate like that, but I wanted to just learn more, like, why do these encounters happen? When do they happen? Who do they happen to? Um, I've always just been a person that wants to know everything, even though I gotta have realistic expectations that I'll never know everything, but I definitely have always had a pursuit of knowledge.
What do you think drives that pursuit of knowledge for you? Like, did it come from like was there family interested in this subject, or?
No, not at all. Um, yeah, my family was very much not, you know, i- into any of that stuff. They always told me, you know, no other spirits exist except the Holy Spirit. So they were very just, they didn't even really have any interest in it or, didn't even really recognize it as anything.
Do you think they ever had any experiences of their own?
If they have, they haven't told me about it. Um, so no, I'm not sure. I've also never really asked them actually.
You have this interest in it. You're, diving into is a little bit of the topic here and there. What happened next with your interest?
So I've kind of been thinking about this too, like in preparation for the podcast, like what I experienced as a kid, I guess, because I just want to put out there, I've never in my life seen a full bodied apparition, nothing like that. I didn't have many unexplainable experiences as a kid. Um, there's 2 instances that I remember. I remember when my grandfather died. He died in the room, at my grandma's house where me and my brother would always sleep, when we visited. And I remember after he died, I woke up to a blue light in the corner, and, I just thought, it's a computer or something giving off a weird light, but then it just kinda stayed there, and I saw the computer was off, and, so that was, like, my first kind of unexplained, experience, but I that's not really an experience that even stayed with me, doesn't, like, stand out in my mind. Um, my second experience as a kid was is kinda more, uh I don't unexplainable, I guess. I remember I was going in to see a movie with my family, my brother, my dad, and I think we were seeing, like, The Mummy or something, which just goes to show how long ago this was.
I remember that one.
Yeah. So, as we were entering the theater, I, um, I saw this plane, this just, like, little single engine Cessna, and there was smoke coming out of it, and it was kind of like almost spiraling, like it was gonna crash. And I said, "Oh my gosh, look, Dad! Like, do you see that? Look at that plane!" And he just looked up. He's like, "There's nothing there. Come on, let's go see this movie." And I was like, "What do you mean that there's a plane with smoke coming out of it?" And again, I was probably like 8 years old at this point, so it's probably just thinking I'm imagining things. Um, so we go see the movie, we come out, we're eating dinner that night, and my parents always watch the news at 5 o'clock. And on the news was a plane crash that happened because there was a regional airport near the movie theater where a lot of people do flight instruction for those single engine planes. And I noticed on the news that the crash didn't happen until after the time that we got out of the movie. So it didn't happen until a few hours after I saw what I saw in the sky, which kind of freaked me out. And I said, "Dad, do you remember I saw this? I saw this. I told you." And again, he kind of just brushed it off, and we never really talked about it again.
Wow. Yeah, I would say that was a precognitive experience right there.
Yeah, so but, those are really the only 2 experiences, I had as a young child that, and even then, I didn't really know what those things were. I didn't really know about the paranormal except, ghost hunters and stuff, so I didn't really make that connection of, could I be sensitive to this stuff? What's happening here? I was just so young, I didn't have the knowledge to make any of those connections yet.
Do you consider yourself to be sensitive or empathic when it comes to certain things?
Um, Again, I didn't really think about any of this until until actually, preparing for coming on this podcast that I kind of thought about it and reflected it on it, and I was like, maybe I am." And I always kind of hesitate, considering myself an empath or sensitive because, I feel like I don't necessarily have the qualifications to determine that. So I don't want to label myself as anything and, be completely wrong. But I do think that, yeah, I think I might be a little more prone or open to experiencing things than some other people. It's nothing major. Like, I'm not a medium or anything. Like I said, I've never seen an apparition or anything like that. But, definitely, I think empathic for sure.
And there's different, I guess, levels and degrees to exhibiting empathic tendencies.
Mhm.
I know for some people, they'll be in a room where there's a lot of people, and they'll just be overwhelmed by all the energy that it will actually affect them physically, and they'll have to leave the room.
Yeah, I've kind of experienced that too. I bartend, I work in a very social atmosphere because I do love being social. I'm a very social person. For the most part, I do enjoy feeling other people's energy because I love feeling positive energy. Who doesn't? But it can get exhausting sometimes. It's a lot. There have been a lot of instances where, uh, for instance, when I worked in law enforcement, no one's, no one's calling law enforcement because they're having a good day. It's always very negative experiences, and that I think it would exhaust anyone to be in that situation all the time, but it really took a toll on my physical well-being as well. I was getting sick a lot, really depressed a lot. Um, and I mean, even nowadays, if I'm around a lot of people for a long period of time, I need at least 2 days to just be in my house, kind of isolate, not in a depressive way, but just a recharging kind of way.
What drew you to law enforcement?
Um, my dad worked in law enforcement. I kind of, heard a lot of interesting stories from him. I kind of wanted to follow in his footsteps, but I really just wanted to stay in forensics. That was my big passion. Um, I've just always really been interested in kind of, first off, criminal investigations, stuff like that, mystery. I think everyone likes a little bit of that. And then just forensics has always just the science behind it, and I've always felt like I've had a very strong stomach from an early age, so I figured, I can witness certain things that other people might not be able to handle. Why not use that? Because people have to do this job. Might as well be one of those people if I, have this ability to get through it.
When you were working in law enforcement, did you have any of that, dare I say, sixth sense, call it a hunch, intuition, whatever we want to label it as? Did any of that come into play as you're working on some of these investigations?
Um, yeah, actually, and I don't think it's in my experience, this definitely wasn't just unique to me. A lot of other people I worked with also experienced there were certain situations where before you really have any details about a case or even a call you're responding to, let the hairs on the back of your neck will stick up, and you kind of do get this sense that like something's not right here. Maybe I need to, call for backup or not enter this location alone. And a lot of times that feeling is right. There could be a hidden threat that you might not notice until you're there, but for some reason you get that adrenaline rush, like something is wrong. And a lot of other people I worked with experience that same feeling as well. Um, there are also times where, we would be doing interrogations, and there's when you're doing an interrogation, I think being, empathic is very useful because I will say there are some people out there who, just exude negative energy. A lot of times, people who have murdered or abused people, like very just not good people, there's not even something in their eyes, it's a lack of something that you look at them and you can just tell that there's a light that's like missing. And I've actually experienced that look in people's eyes outside of law enforcement, just in a few instances in my daily life, bartending. I had this guy come up to me at the bar, and just the look in his eyes was recognizable from all of those times where, I did talk to very evil, I'll just say evil people. And that's a look that you don't forget once you see it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've heard a similar thing described by people who work in demonology, but that's what you're experiencing leads me to believe that you have a level of discernment that others may not have. But I think you have something. I mean, what you're describing is very similar to what others have shared with me. So,
Yeah, it's really interesting that, so many people can have these universal experiences.
have you ever heard of a gentleman named Father Malachi Martin?
That sounds very familiar.
Yeah, he was an exorcist for the Vatican, and he would often describe what he would deem as someone who is perfectly possessed, and he could see this. He could tell when somebody was possessed by some sort of entity. And I'm wondering if because you've seen a lot of stuff. You've seen a lot of stuff out there. Um, what do you think drives that? Do you think in some of these crimes people are possessed, or do you think it's just normal human nature?
That's a really good question to think about. Because mental illness, sociopathy, psychopathy can really play a role in why people do the things that they do. But in my experience, people with those diagnosed illnesses, maybe the diagnosed lack of empathy, the chemical imbalance in the brain itself, those people didn't have that look in their eye. They didn't exude that negative feeling. It's it was just certain people that did. And I don't rule out the possibility that a lot of instances could have been demonic. I haven't delved that much into demonology to necessarily say yes or no, but definitely from what I've also heard from people with who have witnessed, demonic possessions or stuff like that, a lot of them talk about eyes changing color, and how when someone does appear to be possessed, that their eyes go black. And that was exactly what I saw with these people, just dark black eyes. And it's once you see it, it's something you can't really even describe to someone that hasn't. It's a very interesting feeling when you look into someone's eyes like that.
Yeah, that'll stick with you for a while.
Oh yeah, for sure.
What were some of the more memorable experiences? Maybe some of the more unusual, or well, just weird or unusual.
There were a few instances, not I never witnessed this personally, but a lot of other colleagues will witness on night shift driving around and seeing people walk across the street that just disappear the second they drive by. They'll look in the rear view mirror and they won't be there. And a lot of times, it would happen on very busy roads where there have been a lot of, hit and runs and car accidents. Um, so that's always pretty interesting. There was this road that was supposedly haunted on, in the posts where I worked. Um, and my friend actually had an experience going down that road. They weren't involved in law enforcement, but we would get very weird similar calls on this road. It was this one little lane dirt road that went down to the waterfront in the area, and it passed this very old part of the train tracks that are no longer in use. And a lot of people experience when they cross over these train tracks, weird figures will appear, or things will just feel very eerie. The typical, like, oh, your car will turn off. I don't know about all that, but it could happen. But mostly a lot of just very dark, tall figures appear once you cross these train tracks. And um, I was responding to a call there one time, and I didn't see any figures, but you do get a very eerie feeling once you cross over those train tracks. And I don't know the history if anything happened there before, but it is a very eerie place.
When you mean an eerie feeling, what do you mean?
It's kind of like it's so once you cross over those train tracks, it's very quiet, and it's a wooded area. You expect to hear a lot of birds and tree frogs and bugs and stuff like that, especially in the summertime. But it is dead silent over those tracks, which, if you're familiar with camping or being out in the woods, usually when the woods go silent, that means there's some sort of predator around. Um, and you always kind of feel like you're being watched when you're there, and you have this feeling that you need to turn around and leave, that like something wants you out of there.
Is commonly reported as the Oz effect.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, because the Oz effect is usually associated with UFO phenomena. And what typically happens is when someone is seeing a UFO or witnessing a UFO, a lot of the environmental sounds will just cease.
Interesting.
And then when the UFO leaves the scene, those environmental sounds will come back. But you're describing paranormal events with these
Mhm.
tall, dark figures. Did you see any of these tall, dark figures at all?
I did not. Like I said, I've never seen what I thought was like, a full body apparition. I don't, I feel like, even though could be considered sensitive to these kind of things, it's never really in a visual aspect. So I never really saw any figures. Like I said, tons of accounts that they've been there, but it was always just more of a being watched and just uncomfortable feeling.
Did any of your colleagues ever talk about UFO reports in that area?
No, um, not that I can recall. And we didn't even really get a lot of calls from citizens about any UFOs or anything. Granted, there was a military base right there. Aberdeen Proving Ground is very close, and they had a lot of aircraft in the area that would typically be seen. So I think a lot of people just kind of saw that stuff, but again, like, they never got any reports on anything.
Going back to your personal experiences outside of law enforcement, you had mentioned in our pre conversation here that you had played with a Ouija board.
Oh yeah, back when I was curious and inexperienced.
Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, so the first time I had ever, played with a Ouija board, um the very first time was at a sleepover. I was, gosh, probably 12 or 13, and group of girls. We didn't really take it very seriously. My friend and I, who were very much believers in the paranormal at the time, um, we still looked up, like, the opening and closing protection prayers and stuff like that, because we at least wanted to take it seriously. But you could tell, the rest of the girls, they were moving it on their own, and, asking silly questions and, making up silly answers. So that I was like, okay, this is not even serious. But me and my friend that, do believe in the paranormal did at the time. The next week we had a sleepover, just us, and we're like, you know what? Let's just try this, just you and me right now. So we did, did the protection, opening, closing prayers, stuff like that. Had an intention to only invite positive entities. So we started asking questions, and we ended up communicating with this entity for, I mean, probably 2.5 hours.
Whoa.
Yeah, very, very intense conversations. It wasn't the typical, like, who has a crush on me in school that, like, 12-year-olds ask Ouija boards. We were like, you know, what realm are you stuck in? Like, can you travel? Are you stuck where you passed away? Stuff like that, because we were just very curious. Um, so this spirit, this entity, it told us that they were a child when they died. They died in the 70s from malaria over in Africa. So complete super far away from Maryland, obviously. Um, and throughout the night, I guess in the beginning of the conversation, we asked, can you show yourself physically? And they kind of hinted that it takes a lot of energy to be able to do that. So we liked ghost hunters and stuff like that. So we knew that sometimes entities can draw energy from let's say electronics or other sources around them. So we both had iPod classics at the time. Again, you can see how old this is.
I remember those.
Yeah, and you remember, they could last like a week and a half off of one charge. So both of our iPods were fully charged, and we put them, not in the middle of our little circle, but near it, because we kind of figured, okay, here's a nice little energy source if the spirit needs it. And so we just kept on communicating. We asked, can you tell us where you are and what happens after you die? And said no. And we said, why not? And they said, there are rules. We said, who makes the rules? And they said, can't say. So that was really interesting. And actually that wouldn't be the first time that I've heard that either.
Oh.
Yeah, so that was kind of like a reoccurring thing in my paranormal experiences. Um so eventually, we just talk about a bunch of different things. Eventually toward the end of the night, he spelled out ready to show. And so we're like, "Oh, he's ready to, manifest himself." So it ended up spelling out bed. And we look over to the bed, and it had like the imprint that someone was sitting on it, and it spelled touch. So we put our hand over the spot, and it had to be, I mean, 20 to 30 degrees colder than the rest of the room, freezing. So that was, we're 12 years old. We think that's the coolest thing ever. So eventually, we say goodbye to that entity. We're very satisfied with our night, communicating the way we did. So we check our iPods, and the battery is almost completely drained on both of ours. And like I said, they can last a week and a half on one charge. So that was definitely really strange. So that was really my only positive Ouija board experience.
So you didn't give up on the Ouija board after that?
No, and I should have because I was just so amazed by the experience. I wanted to tell everyone, be like, "Look, this is real. I'm not crazy. I'll show you." So I ended up doing one at my house. My house is already very old. It was built in 1900. It wasn't very strong, but I always kind of felt a presence in my room, specifically my closet. Never felt negative or anything. My closet would creak open sometimes in the middle of the night, and I could also chalk that up to being an old house with weird airflow. Who knows? But it definitely felt like something was there. But again, never negative. So one of my friends comes over that night, and I'm like, dude, I gotta show you this Ouija board. It's so cool.
And
So
how old were you at this time?
this was a week later. So this was
Okay,
a week
okay.
after my first experience. I did not wait. Um, yeah, so I, you know, did the opening prayer, all that stuff. I'm trying to communicate, we're trying to communicate with something. And all of a sudden, I hear my mom coming up the steps. And I'm like, oh no, my mom will kill me if she sees this. So I just threw it under my bed and didn't close the session, didn't do a closing prayer, nothing, just left it, forgot about it, went downstairs and ate dinner. Um, so that the next 2 weeks were the most active in terms of activity that I've ever experienced. The feeling in my closet went from, positive, just kind of something there, to heavy. And every time I would go in the closet or even near it, it just felt bad. Um, my mom, of course, this is very cliche, had a lot of those porcelain dolls, the creepy looking ones. And for some reason, she was like, oh, I don't want to have these anywhere on display, so I'll keep them in your closet. And I hated them. So that over that 2 weeks, when I would come home from school, it was almost every other day there would be another broken doll on my closet floor, to the point where all of them were broken after this 2 weeks. Not a single doll survived. Um, and it would always happen when I wasn't there. I would never hear or see them fall, but whenever I would come home, they were broken. So, um, over that 2 weeks, the closet door would open again, but it would be every single night. Every single night, right when I would try to fall asleep, it would open, and it wasn't a creak open. It was very much a like someone was just opening it to walk through, a very sudden, not necessarily slamming open, but just someone opening a door. Um, and again, it didn't feel like it did before. It felt negative. So this feeling is kind of building and building and culminating. And this one specific night, I remember it was a Friday night, and it was exactly 2 weeks after I had initially, messed with the Ouija board. And I was home alone. My parents were at our, vacation cabin, and, they let us stay home a lot when we were, 13. My brother was 15 at the time. So, we weren't bad kids. We'd never burnt the house down. So they trusted us. Um, but I remember I was drawing on my floor listening to the radio. because for some reason I'd always loved to sit on the floor. And my bedroom door was closed and the doorknob starts turning, like just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And at first, I was like, okay, this is my brother messing with me because he would do this kind of stuff all the time. So I shout out, I'm like, dude, stop. I'm not in the mood. I'm trying to concentrate. Um, no answer. Never heard footsteps back to his room and start again. Then it hit me that my brother wasn't home, that he was out with his friend on a camping trip. So he wasn't even near the house. So that's when I was like, okay, this isn't normal. Um, I also had two dogs, but they weren't home because they were with my parents at the vacation house. So house was completely empty, just me and whatever this was. So I muster up the courage to open the door and just face the fears, because at first I thought it was I almost thought it was a burglar or something messing with me and wanting to, draw me out of the room for some reason. So I had a baseball bat, went to yeah, better safe than sorry. Had my baseball bat in one hand, opened the door really fast with the other hand. And when I opened that door, my closet door on the other side of the room slammed open, like slammed against the wall. And one of my posters on my wall, it didn't fall down, it didn't just fall down, it was ripped off the wall. The edges of the poster were still hanging on the wall, but you could visibly see it torn off the wall. So at that point, I ran out of my house. I don't even think I shut the door behind me, and went to my friend's house who lived one street over, and they walked me back so I could shut and lock the door, and I stayed there the rest of the weekend. Um, from that point on, I refused to sleep in my room. I absolutely refused because I couldn't comfortably do it. Um, then I remembered, oh my God, that Ouija board is still under my bed. And I didn't do anything to close it. That, this communication tool is still open right now. So, um, I didn't know what to do with it. So I ended up telling my parents. That was very difficult. And
How did
they,
they take it?
oh man, they didn't believe me at first. I don't know if they ever really did, but since I refused to sleep in my room, I would sleep in theirs on the floor because it was there was no other AC in the house but our bedrooms. Like I said, old house, no central air. Um, so I would sleep on their floor and I refused to go back in my room until something was done. So I think they just got annoyed to the point where they're like, okay, we're going to call the priest just to, cover our bases and hopefully this helps. So the priest from our church came and he was not happy. I got a very long lecture. He ended up taking the Ouija board and disposing it in a way that they didn't tell me, but they he ended up taking it. Did the whole holy water around the room thing and said some stuff. I don't really remember exactly what, but after that, heaviness was lifted. I didn't feel anything negative anymore, and nothing happened after that.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah. And so, that also, kind of led me to just confirm in my head that okay, that was real. Because if the Catholic Church can recognize and say this is real and something they did actually, affected it, like that, how can you deny that? At least, growing up in my belief, I grew up if the Catholic Church says it's true, then it is. So that kind of like really re guess reassured me that what I was experiencing was real.
So, did that deter you from seeking this stuff out, or did that just further fuel your fire and your desire?
It fueled it.
Oh boy.
It fueled it, but, I was still very curious about everything, but it did take me a few years to kind of, explore any of that again.
Did you experiment with any other types of divination tools beyond the board?
Yes, spirit boxes actually have, in the past, I know there's some kind of, back and forth as to whether or not they're legit.
To those in the audience who may not be familiar with a spirit box, why don't you explain how it works, or your understanding of how a spirit box works?
So my understanding of how it works, is that it filters through, radio stations, very, very quickly. And so when you turn it on, it sounds like white noise. Um, but it's believed that entities can manipulate the sound to communicate, say specific words, maybe stop at a channel that's saying something that they want to communicate. So it's a really interesting form of communication. Sometimes it is very hard to understand just because the radio's very, like I said, a lot of white noise. So sometimes it can be hard to understand.
You're correct. This is a device that sweeps across the various radio bands, and it'll go through the bands at a very fast, rapid rate. So what you're hearing is a lot of chaos, a bunch of different sounds, a lot of stray voices, all happening at once. But the theory, right, is that these spirits or whatever is manipulating these devices can take those stray sounds and those errant noises and formulate responses to questions that you ask in the forms of very audible words. Now, again, from the skeptical side of things, people think, oh, well, you're just trying to make sense of chaos here, right? You're formulating the words that you want to hear. And in some cases, that may be correct. But in other cases, sometimes that may not be what's happening. It may be some sort of manipulation by what I don't know. It could be an entity, it could be within us too. For a long time, I felt that when we're going on paranormal investigations, maybe we have more of an influence over these devices than we tend to realize.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but I mean, it does make sense. I mean, we affect the, energy around us just as much as, spirits and entities we can't see. So, I mean, I don't see why not that, why that wouldn't be a possibility too.
Yeah, and it's just a theory.
Yeah, and I also will admit that, I think a lot of times we might hear what we want to hear, or like, something that fits our question more so than, an answer that we might want. Um, I also the spirit boxes that I've used, which I know this is probably criticism might follow this, but have always just been the apps on my phone. And yeah, so, but, and I've had some that, you know, will just say like demon exorcism, like right
Right, of
away. And
course.
it's like, okay, this obviously is not legit. But there have been other times where, I'm asking a question and I get an answer that is, can't be coincidence, that just makes too much sense, is loud and clear, and, is no way that, I mean, again, I don't understand all the powers in the world. Maybe I could have thought it myself, but uh, also things like I just wouldn't know, answers that I wouldn't know, and, so it's kind of unexplainable sometimes.
Yeah, and that's how this phenomenon tends to operate. It gives you just enough to get you curious, but it never gives you enough to fully answer what you're seeking or what you're after.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's on purpose. Like I said, then I'd communicated with other entities, there have been a few times where they mentioned there's rules and that they can't say everything that we want to know. So, maybe things are just meant to be a mystery.
Is this still something that you're doing today?
So I have not handled a spirit box since before I left for Hawaii. That was the last time I've really, messed around with one. Ever since then, I've just kind of given it a break. Let things, if things want to communicate with me, I'll let them make the first move. I'm kind of want to take a break from, possibly opening forms of communication that aren't meant to be open. But
That's smart.
yeah, I've learned a lot over the years. So one that really sticks out, which is probably the uh first really intense interaction that I've had. Me and a few friends, my two friends, we decided we were bored one night and we wanted to go to the cemetery that was uh really infamous in West Virginia. I believe it had something like 14,000 graves.
Whoa.
So huge, huge cemetery. Um, graves that date back to, the mid 1800s. A lot of history there. So, it was actually my friend's first time using one of the Spirit Box apps, and it wasn't one I was familiar with, so I really didn't even know how to work it. Um, and it was one of the ones that it'll have audio, with the regular radio stations, and it'll also have words that pop up on the screen visually. Um, and so she forgot to turn the audio part on for most of the time, and we were just kind of reading the words. And it was it was interesting how throughout the entire cemetery, nothing really happened. We there was one at one point we were it's going to be sad, just a warning. We were in the walking in front of child graves, and cold baby popped up on the screen right when we were walking by. So that was a weird one, but other than that, it was fairly quiet. Um we turned on the once we realized that we'd forgot to turn on the audio part, we did. And again, little blips here and there, but nothing really uh audible and, identifiable. So we did just a little bit of reading on the cemetery before we went, and turned it a lot of reports say that the most activity happened at this mausoleum on the top of the hill. So we decided to go there, and you have to drive up the hill. It's like I said, huge cemetery, long walk. Um, and I have to mention the weather was clear. The rest, like the whole, rest of the cemetery, everything was clear. There was no rain, there was no fog. And as we were going up the hill, fog starts to appear, like really low to the ground. It seemed like a haunted house movie or something. Very cliche, but it just appeared out of nowhere. Um, and I snapped a few pictures throughout the night. Again, rest of the cemetery looks very clear. But when I took a picture of the mausoleum, it looked like it was raining, even though it wasn't at the time. And it was very blurry, gray. It it just had this very eerie look about it that the rest of the cemetery did not have on camera.
What was the temperature at that particular time of night?
Um, it was over the summer, so it was actually fairly warm, but not humid. You would think like if it's a foggy night, it would be pretty humid, but it wasn't at all. So temperature's probably in like the 50s, 60s or so. Typical Appalachian summer weather. Um, yeah, so weather wasn't really out of the ordinary or anything until we got to the mausoleum.
Was there any drop in temperature when you approached it?
Not that I can recall, no. Um, it when we walked up the steps, because there was a long flight of steps that went up to it. Um, we walked up the steps and, I kinda got that eerie feeling. Um, I don't know that my friends did, they didn't say anything. Um, Actually, one of my friends was, dancing around and singing, which I was like, "Yeah, that might piss some entities off, but, go for it." Um,
Why would they do that?
I
What was the thought process?
She's just a unique guy. Shout out to him because 'cause I'm sure he'll listen to this. But so, we get to the top of the stairs, we turn the audio portion of the spirit box back on, and just ask, "Is there anyone here that would like to communicate with us?" And, oof, I get chills just saying it and reliving it. A few seconds after we asked that, the the radio channels kinda went silent, just stopped, which isn't really typical for a spirit box, it's usually blips in between, but it stopped, and over the speaker was just the most deep, non-human, guttural growl I have ever heard, and it just sent chills down our spine. We immediately looked at each other and just took off after that. But the sound, I can't even it, it replays in my head and I like shudder. But there's no way I could even remotely mimic it because it just sounded non-human.
Are you ever afraid that these things will follow you back home?
Um, s- I wouldn't say afraid. Um, Cautious maybe. Uh, Whenever I do come back home from, having these experiences, I always try to be vigilant of any, changes in feeling, if anything feels off in the house or, objects moving around, stuff like that. Um, and I kind of just have a mindset that, the more you fear something, the more it has the opportunity to attach itself to you. Um, I don't know if that's really accurate, but in my thought process, my experience, if I kind of set an intention that, you know, hey, whatever you are, I do not give you permission to follow me. I do not give you permission to attach to me. Let's just leave things where they are. And for the most part, I think that's worked. Um, the only really lasting, uh, you know, presence that stayed with me was that one very negative Ouija board experience. But other than that, I never really experienced increased activity around me after these sessions.
Speaking of like mass graves and such, you were camping at a park.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, let's share that story.
So there is a park in Maryland. Um, I can just say it. It's Point Lookout State Park. People of gosh, I forget what video game it is. I want to say Fallout, something like that. One of those popular video games. It's actually a level in there. It is home to what is called America's most haunted lighthouse, one of the oldest as well. It was the park, the location was used as a Civil War prisoner of war camp. Um, it was very overpopulated, a lot of unfortunate deaths there. Um, and actually, the lighthouse, when it was built, the first few owners of it, and including the man who built it, died within the first year of living there. So this lighthouse already kind of had a history to it that wasn't positive. So I didn't know any of this before I went here.
Oh
I
boy.
was Yeah, so I had no idea about this. Um, I did notice that again, just weird feeling in the park, very kind of very heavy. Um, serene in a way, not necessarily negative, but heavy for sure. When I first got there, I don't know if this is even really a related experience, but I remember walking to the restroom after we set up camp, and there was a terrapin turtle in front of me that was huge, just walking across the path, and it made eye contact with me. And this is going to sound so weird, but I swear this thing was like looking at me, like almost like staring into me. It was just the eye contact was very strange. So I just kind of froze and looked at it, and it kept eye contact the whole time as it walked across this path. So I'm like, okay, strange, but whatever. Get done the restroom, walking back, and obviously turtles are very slow. It should have been in view by the time I walked back, and it wasn't. And this thing was huge, hard to miss, but it when I walked back, and mind you, I was gone for maybe 3 minutes, nowhere to be found. Um, so that kind of started off the 3 days. And uh, the second night, the first night was very windy, so there was nothing paranormal to hear or see, just a lot of wind. Second night was extremely calm, like total opposite of the night before. And me and my partner at the time were, hanging out, trying to sleep in the tent. The uh, little like mesh covering was open in the tent, so it had that mesh so you could see out of the tent, see around you. Um, and our friends that we were camping with, they were fast asleep. I heard them snoring like bears next to us. No offense to them, but it's usually
Sorry,
Dan.
friends.
Yeah, they do snore though. Love you guys. But yeah. So we heard, or at least I started to hear footsteps around the tent, and it kind of sounded like a heavy boot, um, almost like a guard walking around, and then a very loud "Hey!" like that, like just someone yelling "Hey!" And me and my partner look at each other and we both said, "Did you hear that?" It's like, "Yeah." So, we were looking at the mesh part, nothing to see, but we could still hear the footsteps just circling our tent. So, yeah, weird experience. Other than that, that was really those were the only two things that happened at the park, but it was still to the point where, it stuck with me, and I was like, that doesn't usually happen when I'm camping. So I go back home, Google the park, and it turns out we were just sleeping on a mass grave of Confederate soldiers that, yeah, that had died at that war camp during the war. And I was like, wow, that explains a lot. There are a lot of witness testimonies of guards walking around the area. A lot of people have seen full apparitions of, you know, Civil War dressed guards, just wandering around. A few people have also heard the loud "Hey!" that we heard. Just the kind of like warning. Um, and yeah, so it was very strange to experience that and come back and find out, like, wow, that I'm not the only one, that really happened. And there's actually another really interesting stories of a lot of people on one of the beaches there. They'll witness a woman walking up and down the beach saying that she's looking for her headstone. And a lot of sightings of this woman. And it turns out there was a cemetery nearby where a woman had her headstone stolen. And it was, I believe it was found like 50 some years later in a hotel in DC or something. But it was never returned. They never returned her headstone to her burial place. So she's just been wandering looking for it ever since. And it's again crazy that that was a documented incident.
What's the name of this park?
It's called Point Lookout State Park. It is the at the very most southern point of Maryland on the Chesapeake Bay.
Had you ever thought about becoming a full-fledged paranormal investigator, or at least joining a paranormal group to kind of learn more about this?
I have. Um, I never really, I've never done research on like local groups or anything, but I have considered it. Um, but at the same time, I as much as curious as I am, and I do want to explore more of this, I also kind of just want to maybe give it a break for a minute and just kind of I don't know, just ever since the Hawaii incident, just kind of just reflecting on, you know, I guess what I'm doing in life and just, getting through that. But I think eventually I would really like to kind of join a team. So at least if I do want to delve more into it, it's a setting where, there are people with experience who can kind of guide me on doing it safely and effectively. So yeah, you know what? You just gave me an idea. I might.
There we go. All right. Well, if you get destroyed out there in the field of paranormal investigating, you can't blame me.
I'm definitely blaming you. Just
S-
kidding, just kidding.
so let's get into some of your your travel, right? Because I'm curious how your perspective on life has evolved since that incident, particularly in relation to this emphasis on travel, right? And adopting this, as you call it, this life is short mindset. How did this come to be? Was it because of the Maui stuff?
It kinda it started a little bit before that, probably, in I believe it was 2021, 2022, when I took my first, cross country trip. I visited my brother out in, California, went skydiving, so much cool stuff. And then took a train back across the country. It was my first cross country train trip, and I do all this travel solo. I really like solo travel. Um, so that kind of the sense of like wanderlust and exploring was always there. But I think after the incident in Maui, it just kind of made me think, okay, that could have very easily been me, along with all those other, you know, amazing people who didn't deserve to be taken away this early. Um, but also, something looked out for me. And I feel like it's almost insulting to whatever that presence was not to live my life to the fullest now and kind of take advantage of every day I have here. So I just kind of started living out of two suitcases and a backpack and just kind of go where the wind takes me.
as we get older in life, it gets harder to take those opportunities and do those adventures because we have things holding us down, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. And I would consider myself fortunate enough to not be married or have kids at the moment. So, I have a cat who I love very much, and sometimes it's hard to leave her, but she's when I do travel, she's in really good hands. Um, but I know it's hard for people who have, kids and, a career and stuff. I get it, but I've just always been like, you can always have a career. You can always just, there's never, you're always going to have an opportunity to work, I guess, and, kind of run that rat race and be a part of, that part of society. But you might not get that chance to go across the country again. You might not get that chance to cross these things off your bucket list. So I just, I want to take advantage of that as much as possible. And, for a lot of people, the financial aspect of it is an issue. So, I've just, in order to kind of, I guess, not have that affect my travels, is I'll find remote jobs that will pay for the flight and housing. So it won't have to pay rent or anything and just save up that money and travel more. So that's what I did in Alaska. I really want to go back soon as well. I'd love to work around Denali in the summer. Um, but yeah, it's just, there are smart ways of doing it. Then, I think anyone is capable of dropping everything and traveling. It might not be the most comfortable thing, but everyone has the option to do it if they want to, and there are resources for just about anyone to do it.
What inspired you to pursue train travel in particular? And what are some of those highlights from your coast to coast journeys?
Oh man, trains are just so cool.
I agree.
I I've flown a lot in my travels. I used to go to Florida a lot because I was seeing someone there. So I've been on more planes than I can count, and I love planes, love aviation. But at one point, I was like, okay, how many times have I seen the country from the air? What would this journey look like from the ground? And, I like solo travel, but, especially as a young woman, it's not the most safe thing to do a road trip by yourself across the country. Um, so I was like, you know what? I'm going to try out a train. So the first cross country trip I went on, was when I flew out to California to see my brother a few years back, and took the train from Los Angeles through all the Southwest, through the desert, up to Chicago, and then another train back to Western Maryland, where I was staying at the time. And I just fell in love with it because you don't have to focus on driving. You can take a nap. They have a cafe. You can drink wine while you while you see the country, and it's like you see a lot of beauty from the railroads, and like it's a really unique way to see the country, and I highly recommend it to anyone.
I don't know much about this, but I assume it's just one straight long trip. They make stops to pick people up, drop people off, but they don't make any like extended time to linger in any particular city, right?
Yes and no. So they will do, short stops along the way. Some stops are just to pick up and drop off passengers. Some stops will be, 15, 20 minutes for people to stretch their legs or, go smoke, whatever. Um, my first train journey, we actually had a 2-hour stop in Albuquerque. So, they will do stops along the way, where sometimes they switch out, the electric power for coal power, locomotives, or they'll need to, change crew or just light maintenance too. So when that's the case, they have to turn off all the electricity on the train, and everyone just kind of has a chance to explore wherever they are.
What particular routes do you recommend?
Oh,
Because I assume this is through Amtrak, right?
yes, it's through Amtrak. Yeah, and, every route has something different depending on kind of what you're looking for. Um, the first train I took was called the Southwest Chief. Um, that goes all, like I said, all through the desert. I had never been in that area before, so it was amazing to see, the rock formations and just the vastness of it all. You don't realize how big this country is until you actually go across it. So if you're interested in like, more desert scenery, I highly recommend Southwest Chief. Um, Second one I took was called the California Zephyr, which is known to be quote unquote the most beautiful train ride in the US. And that will take you through the Rockies, along the Colorado River, just absolutely breathtaking scenery. And they do have the option, you can do coach or they do have private rooms. First one I did, I was in coach, and that was I was proud of myself for spending 3 nights in a reclining seat and surviving.
Oh boy.
Um,
Okay. So you recommend the private rooms, huh?
I do. If you're short, like I'm 5 feet, so I could just recline all the way back and have a whole chair to myself very comfortably. If you're tall, oh gosh, I would be so sorry for you. Definitely get a private room if you can. The private rooms are also nice because they include meals. So you get 3 meals included a day, and it even includes a beer or glass of wine or something at dinner too. So it definitely will save you. It saves you money for kind of. You're paying a higher ticket, but also you're not buying stuff from the cafe car constantly.
What should people know about cruise ships? Because you have the experience. So why don't you enlighten us how we can be better passengers aboard a cruise ship?
Just go easy on those employees. My gosh, they deal with a lot. Like I said, you don't get days off. Very long work hours, not the best places to sleep at night. You get a tiny room with, roommates typically. And again, this depends on the ship too. A lot of the larger, more modern ships, the crew members will get their own room. Um, with my rather small, older ship, that was not the case. Um, but just know that there's like a city underneath of you when you're on a ship. There's those bottom decks. It's like a whole other world that is constantly firing on all cylinders to make your experience as much of a happy vacation as possible. Um, just also highly recommend but anywhere on vacation, not just a cruise ship. Keep in mind, if you don't see the locals doing it, don't do it. We had a lot of people in Kauai, especially, go to these little swimming holes that will have insane rip currents out of nowhere.
Oh boy.
And yeah, very dangerous. And again, like I tell people, if you go there and there aren't locals swimming in it, don't get in.
Okay. Valuable advice. We may have saved a few lives
Yeah,
here.
definitely.
Write that down. If the locals aren't doing it, don't do it.
Yes, and, always, ask questions too, ask the crew members questions. A lot of times they've been to those ports of call before. They can, recommend some stuff that's off the beaten path that's, not, super touristy, and you can really find out a lot of cool stuff.
You've taken the time to talk about some of these experiences, share some great stories here with us tonight, and I know the listener has enjoyed them, or else they wouldn't be tuned in and still listening to this episode. But I'm sure it even encouraged others out there, who may have had these similar experiences that they can relate to you in, maybe to step forward and share these stories. So if you are listening out there and you've had a story, send me an email to info@terrasignals.com, or you can just go to my website, normalparanormal.org, and there's a contact form up there. I'd love to hear directly from you on what you thought about this episode, or even hear some more of these unique stories. Michaela, thank you so much again for coming on the show. Is there anything else that we missed or that you'd like to share real quick?
You know what? I just urge people to have an open mind, accept that some things are just a mystery, and, just live life to the fullest. Don't I have advice, don't focus on the afterlife so much that you forget to live the one you're already in. I thank you so much for having me on. It's been really great to talk about this stuff and, have a comfortable environment to do so. I really appreciate you kind of creating this for people like us.
You have been listening to Terror Signals with Justin Bamforth and presented by Normal Paranormal. For more on this show and other topics of high strangeness, please visit normalparanormal.org or visit the program website at terrasignals.com.